Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is Wednesday, January 20th. So it's Mercury's day. And it's just after 1:30 here Eastern Time. So it is the 8th planetary hour. That is the 8th equal division of the daylight time. And the 8th planetary hour always belongs to the planet of the day. And so it is Mercury's day and Mercury's hour. The sign Gemini is rising on the eastern horizon. And culminating overhead, we have Mercury and Aquarius in his own decan, which is the middle decan of Aquarius and is associated with the Six of Swords. We're going to talk some more about that in a minute. So it's a wonderful time to talk about Mercury and Aquarius in particular. Mercury's going to be spending a lot of time in Aquarius because we're about to go through the whole backward trickster medicine dance, which is what I like to call it. And I'm excited. I feel like I'm ready for some new medicine in my life. I feel like shaking things up a little bit is a good thing after being in, whatever that was, whatever you want to call the 2020. So yeah, and by the way, if you didn't tune in last time, maybe you want to stop right now, or maybe not, but eventually you want to go back and listen to what we talked about last time, because that's kind of the foundational material for what we're going to be talking about this time. And once again, for those of y'all who are listening just in audio, if you can get a chance to tune into the YouTube, it's really worth it. The visuals are so informative, and we're going to be working with some of those again this time. Now, Aquarius is all about groups and brotherhood and sisterhood, right? So we're going to start off, and I've got a sister that I want to give a shout out to that I want all of y'all to know about. So I'm going to share my screen here. My dear sky sister, Andrea Michelle Kennedy, just launched her own dealio at precioushumanbirth.com. And I really highly recommend that y'all go over there, click on the book session tab, and fill out the contact form so you can stay in touch with her, because not only is she a really fine astrologer, she studied under one of the best astrologers I know, Adam Gainsbourg, amongst others. And she helped us put on a couple really fine conferences. But this lady is just good people. You know what I'm saying? I love her dearly. And so I want y'all to check her out and see what she's doing. She's just launched the website there. It's a gorgeous website. And if you fill out that contact form, she's going to be running some specials she told me about. So you can kind of get on the ground floor with her and see what she's doing there. All right. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Mercury and Aquarius, right? So, classically speaking, there's several reasons to think that Mercury and Aquarius, the retrograde of Mercury and Aquarius, might not be as quote unquote bad or malefic or inconvenient or troublesome or any of that stuff as it might be otherwise in some other signs. And this is because Mercury has several kinds of rulership or dignity in Aquarius that it doesn't have elsewhere. primarily the dignity that Mercury has in Aquarius, that's what we call triplicity dignity. And my understanding of triplicity dignity, although I gotta say, I don't think I've ever heard this said anywhere, but what I came to when I put two and two together is that, you know, certain planets have certain connections with certain triplicities or certain elements, right? Now, if you think about it, why would Mercury have a connection with the air element? Well, because Mercury is airy, you know? And so triplicity dignity is basically just saying that the nature of the planet itself agrees with the nature of the sign. They get along, right? If you want to say the temperament of the planet is similar to the temperament of the sign, something like that. Now, in particular, Mercury has triplicity dignity in nocturnal charts in Aquarius, in the air signs in general, which is where all the retrogrades are going to be happening this year. We're going to talk more about that. We're going to focus on Aquarius mostly today, but this is true for all the air signs, that Mercury has triplicity dignity in, specifically in nocturnal charts. So why is that, and what does that look like? Well, let's start out actually with talking about the triplicity ruler of the daytime Aquarius, which is Saturn. So if we think about this for a second, daytime is, you know, the time when, you know, you get up and you go out to work, or you go out and you do your shopping, you're out amongst other people, right? So daytime is kind of like the social time for humans, right? And so the social arena is very active at that time. And so Saturn, as the triplicity ruler of Aquarius, in my view, basically points out the fact that most of the time we are going along under automatic pilot, underneath the auspices of some kind of dogma or ideology or framework through which reality is actually far too weird for us to handle, essentially. And this is, I mean, scientists talk about this. We have all these filters to filter out all the stuff that we can't manage all that stuff. And so we have these filters, we have these dogmas, we have these ideologies, we have all these Saturnian structures through which we perceive reality. And then, long story short, we see what we want to see for the most part. We see what we've trained ourselves to see, or what we've been trained to see, which is a different dealio. It's, you know, I prefer training myself if I'm going to be trained, you know what I'm saying? And that's why I don't claim a specific lineage with any particular teacher. I have many people that I've been very honored to have learned with, but I don't claim, you know, a particular school or a particular lineage, because there's a restrictive box that, you know, Bob Dylan didn't want to be labeled a protest singer, right? I'm not going to be labeled any particular kind of astrologer. But guess what? I was born at night with Aquarius ascendant. So Mercury's my triplicity lord of my ascendant, right? And Mercury is what? Fluid, the opposite of Saturn, right? Saturn is a kind of rigid, kind of structured. I mean, and listen, I love you, Saturn, and I need that in my life for sure. And so I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it is the way it is. In a diurnal sense, we are somewhat blinded by these preconceived structures that through which we perceive reality, for better or worse. That's what it is, right? So that's why Saturn is the diurnal triplicity ruler. Now, at nighttime, something else happens entirely. First of all, here's another thing. Think about this for a second. Think about daytime as yang, or outward moving energy, and nighttime as yin or inward moving energy, right? So there's if Mercury is the planet of communications, there's two aspects to communication, just like there's two parts of music. There's the note, the yang, the sound, the actual thing you hear, and there's the rest in between notes and the spacing of it, right? There's there's communication like I'm doing right now, where I'm actively speaking to you with a Saturnian agenda. Yes, absolutely. Hermetic and a Hermetic tradition from which I'm speaking that I revere greatly. As I said, it can be a good thing. But at nighttime, you might be more concerned with the ability to listen, with the ability to take in and hear things. And this is something of a lost ability, I think, in the modern world. I got to tell you, there's almost a cacophony of voices out there. There's a million ways for you to express yourself, and to, ram. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but there's not a whole lot of rest between the notes anymore. You know what I'm saying? And so, in some ways, I think, for some people at least, that thing that we're not even going to say the numbers of anymore, that's behind us, and hopefully we're moving into another kind of thing, was welcome only in as much as it was a rest from a lot of stuff. It was a rest from an overabundance of yang notes and not enough rest between them. So the other thing is that, the nocturnal environment is generally an enclosed environment, whereas the diurnal environment is an open environment, right? So more, again, social and or public versus nocturnal and or private, right? And so you might be talking about even if you're not just passively listening, and listening is not necessarily passive, actually. Listening is passive when you're simply tapping your foot and waiting for your next chance to insert yourself in the conversation. That's passive listening. When you're really receiving what the other person says, what happens for me is I'm trying to integrate what I'm hearing of their experience into what I know. So I'm trying to find, okay, where does that fit into my encyclopedia of all my experience? Oh, it sounds like that. It sounds like this. And then I might say, hey, I had this happen one time and it seems similar to what you're saying. Does that make any sense? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And so we can go. And so that's when I have actually actively listened. In fact, that's a skill as a counselor that you learn, active listening. There's a bunch of tools. I can nod my head. If you listen to the interview with Elizabeth Hazel, for instance, I remember I was nodding my head a lot because she was saying a lot of cool stuff. And I was just like, you go on, girl, and I was, which, nodding your head is another way of saying, you go on, girl. And so that's active listening. But it is the nocturnal side of things, because we're not speaking, we're integrating what we're hearing, right? So there's that. And it also might be more private communications, as in either internal, like communications with yourself, whether that be through journaling or contemplation, or it might be communication with relatively unseen or unmanifest phenomenon, with your higher self, for instance, or when I go out and have these communications with the stars and the planets, that's Mercury as the nocturnal triplicity, Lord of my ascendant. I'm able to pick up on some kind of hidden signals. Nocturnal, it's hidden. It's your average person doesn't hear that stuff. You know what I'm saying? But it's because I had a profound ability to shut out the diurnal stuff early in my life, and I learned to just, I became a hermit essentially, and I learned to listen for at another level, right? So that is the nature of what I see as Mercury's triplicity dignity in Aquarius. Now, there's another kind of dignity that Mercury has in the first 7 degrees of Aquarius. Mercury has what's called bounds dignity. Bounds dignity is the ability to define the rules and terms of engagement. We've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go really too much into it because it doesn't really have a play into this retrograde. Mercury's going to station in the 20 degrees, and he's only going to get back to 11. So we're already through the bounds of Mercury, and we're going to move on for now. We'll talk about bounds dignity more at some point, I'm sure. But we want to acknowledge that it's there. Now, the majority of the retrograde is actually going to happen in the second decan or 10 degree segment of Aquarius. So you have 0 to 10, 10 to 20 is the second division, and then 20 to 30. Because Mercury is stationing at 11, it's going to go through almost that entire decan 3 times. So that's where the majority of the retrograde is happening. Now, decans actually predate the zodiac. And so the way I think about it is, if you ever saw that movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right, where they go through this wardrobe into this magical land, and the boy gets in trouble because he breaks some kind of law, and then the witch says, "Aha, I got you now," and Aslan says, "Well, yeah, you do, and we'll pay that price, but I got access to some deeper magic, the deep primordial magic, and I'm gonna break your spell, and I'm gonna overcome it with this deeper, more primordial magic," right? So Aslan, because of his agape, his love was unbounded. He loved his people and more than his own life, and that the power. So it's an obvious parallel for Christ, I think, and that primordial magic that Christ was a mystic. It's really interesting. Christ said that the kingdom of heaven is within, right? What did we just talk about? Nocturnal. It's inside you. And Christ had one law, right? Love one another. I'm laughing because it's like we still haven't got it. I don't know that we ever will, to be honest with you. And I mean that in a loving way, as in like it's that profound. But in the end, I think that the decans, because they come from the Egyptian period, where the Egyptian priests would map out. They noticed that a new star would come into view every so often. They mapped it out, and they're like, yeah, it's about every 10 days. So let's just go ahead, divide this up. We'll assign one star for each decan, and we'll have a map that way. And so that was the first map of the stars, was through these decans. And it later got kind of pasted onto the tropical zodiac by the Greeks, and they applied this rulership of planets that's known as the Chaldean rulership, or that's in descending order. And that's where the planetary rulerships for the decans come from. And when you start, it starts and ends with Mars, the first decan of Aries. And then because there's 36, if 7 times 5 is 35, there's one extra. So it starts and ends with Mars. And the rationale behind that, at least as far as McGregor Mathers was concerned in Book T, and I liked what he says. He says, it's the great energy that is required to transition from winter into spring is signified by the fact that Mars rules the last decan before spring and the first one after spring, right? So Mercury being the decan ruler of the second 10 degrees of Aquarius gives us access to some deep magic of Aquarius. And in the Golden Dawn system, they likened this to the tarot card, the Six of Swords. And it's interesting because tarot is deep or primordial magic by nature because it is image driven. And images, right, were the way that we communicated before we ever had words and written language. We communicated by way of images. In fact, the first languages really were pictographic. So image itself, image is primordial to word, to language, you see. And so the fact that these images are related to these, I think, speaks to that deep magic that I was getting at earlier. And this Six of Swords image that you often see in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is of some people on a boat, and they got 6 swords on the front of the boat, and they're kind of moving from some rough waters towards calmer waters, right? So there's this journey that's implied, and there's this sort of maybe some troublesome things that they're moving away from. But the thing that always bothered me about that, which is kind of interesting, is that the swords are in the boat. Are they carrying their troubles with them? Well, don't we? Don't we kind of carry our troubles with us perpetually? We think we've dealt with them, but they're still with us. And this goes back to the Hermetic idea that there are 3 aspects to anything, whether it be you, me, a situation, a political party, a nation, a philosophy. There's 3 parts to that thing. There's the body, the salt, the material aspect of that thing. So like the analogy is, if we're dealing with the material aspect of something that we want to get rid of, and we just deal with it on a material level, that's like chopping weeds. If you've ever hoed corn or hoed, I had to hoe a big field of garlic when I was, and this field was so big. When I was in the middle of it, all I could see was the field. Like literally, it was in the middle of what they call a swale. And when you're down in the middle of that swale, you can't see out of the field you're in. Like, look this way, it's garlic. That way, it's garlic. That way. Every way you look, which was kind of trippy in and of itself. But the thing about that is, by the time I got through hoeing that whole big field, it was almost time to turn around and start again. It was that big. So you can chop away at the material aspect of something, but the root of it is deeper. And unless you get to the root of it, it keeps coming back. So that's like the people carrying the swords with them, carrying their troubles with them, you see. The root of our problem is more of a soul and or spirit deal. In Hermeticism, they use these 2 words to mean 2 very different things, even though they sound similar, right? Soul and spirit. Oh, no, very different. So spirit is the consciousness of something. So it's a bit more of the it's more yang. It's more of the like the perfect idea of something, if you will, Plato's forms, that sort of thing. Whereas the soul of something is much more actually feminine. It's more of the deep. It's actually the essence of the thing, And that's an interesting thing, difference between men and women, or between the masculine and the feminine, for that matter, is that, women often can feel or tune into the essence of something much better than the masculine can. The masculine gets the idea of it, but they don't necessarily get the essence of it, if that makes any sense. So, and the idea, and because something as an idea is pure and perfect, but material reality never is, you know, this the related aspect to this in alchemy, the king of spirit is like this architect or engineer part of ourselves that's always trying to fix stuff, always trying to make it better. Because of course it can always get better, because you know, it's like those probability distributions where you have this curve that approaches affinity but never meets it, right? So the king of spirit is always seeking to improve and always has plans for the future, whereas the queen of soul, she's more about, hey, this is what is right now. And if you tune into that, then you can touch something more deeply and have more empathy for it. And then that's when you're really hearing somebody, by the way, is when you use the queen of soul, right? If I respond to somebody's problem by trying to fix it for them, or even worse, if I, you know, preemptively start telling people what they should do when they didn't even ask me. I had a deal with a friend who insisted that unsolicited advice was a friendly thing and that it was a necessary part of friendship. And I was like, brother, I don't know how to tell you this, but that ain't my reality. And if it is yours, we're gonna have to not be friends, because I don't, that's hostile to me. I don't like that. I didn't ask for your advice. And you know, and so, and actually that's generally true. Most people see it as kind of hostile, right? So if you just respond to somebody's problem by saying, oh well, you should do this, you should do that, you should do the other, you haven't really heard their soul. You haven't really heard, man, this is affecting me, this is affecting my ability to even want to be here on this planet, yo. You see the difference? That's the difference between spirit and soul. And so when we're talking about the material aspect of something, you know, it's a very different thing than the spirit or soul of that thing. Okay, so where was I? Ah, yes. So back to this image. So carrying our troubles with us, if we only ever deal with the material aspect of a given trouble, then of course we still carry it with us, because the soul of that problem is still there. It's haunting us, basically. You know, and a lot of these problems, you know, especially things like poverty, the stuff that's generational, it ain't even your problem, man. You got that stuff passed on to you through no fault of your own. Although, you know, if you want to talk about karma or whatever, that gets to be really, that'll really piss you off, because then it's like, so what, am I a masochist? I asked for this shit. But I digress, because I don't think it's actually that way, but it's a bit much to get into right at the moment. Um, but as somebody who has experienced that kind of thing, I can tell you, you know, yeah, it is literally like being haunted. And I think basically it is, for all intents and purposes, that your soul has been perturbed at some level, and that perturbance is emanating out into your reality, you see. And thus the root keeps growing the weed, you know. And then we can get into whole thing kind of thing. There really is no such thing as a weed, and all weeds have uses. And yeah. But you get the main point is that yes, these we are carrying these swords with us, good or ill. Now, the spirit aspect of this card, of this image, really did not come home to me until I'm showing the image from Robert Place's Alchemical Tarot. And there's a book that goes along with it. And I'm going to go ahead and plug while I've got you here. It's a really thick book, but it's worth it. See how thick that bad boy is? But you can find him, Robert Place Alchemical Tarot. You can find him on the web. I love this deck. It's one of my favorite ones, and the book's really good too. But you know what he says is that, hey, I'm going to put these swords in the sky because air, right? And I'm going to put the boat on the sea, and then I'm going to imagine that there's this loving breeze that's personified by, and the cloud has this face personified in it. It's blowing the boat along, right? There's this loving guidance that's coming from something called the anima mundi, the world soul. Now, so long as I accept the loving guidance of these higher power, I'm cruising along. The swords are pointing this way. I'm cruising along the same direction of the swords. I got no problems because, you know, I'm going to go right past them, and I'm going to be blessed because I'm in alignment with a higher power. Now, as soon as I try to turn and tack across or even against that, right? Tacking and sailing is when you go back and forth to go upwind. As soon as I start trying to tack against that breeze, all of a sudden these swords now are very dangerous. And they could puncture my sail or cut my mast, and then I'm dead in the water, and maybe even dead altogether, right? Lost at sea. And so this this idea that first, right, think about the level of faith that is required here, that there is a loving presence. Now, this may not even be God. World soul may even be like one step short of what we're actually talking about with God. It may be some slightly lower emanation than God, according to the Neoplatonic and the Hermetic, you know, ideas. That's very possible. But just the fact that there is one implies a God, and therefore, you know, that's a pretty radical thing, actually, since Nietzsche, who said, you know, God is dead, right? And science basically claims there's no God, right? That's why I say science is pseudo-hermetic. They threw out spirit and soul. They only have matter. You got one of three, man. You're less than pseudo-hermetic. You're like, what do they say when you're doing something half-assed? You're about a third assed. You know what I'm saying? It's like completely messed up, man. So, but the idea that there's this, so you have to accept. It's an act of faith to accept there is a force that wants the best for me and is trying to guide me, and I not only have to accept that that's true on faith. Of course, there's synchronicities and there's signs to guide that faith, and that's how we get there. But it's ultimately, it doesn't, you know, you can't prove it. Even Einstein couldn't prove it. And Einstein was one smart dude. Einstein believed it. Absolutely. I guarantee you Einstein believed he was being guided by a higher power. He said as much, and when he said God doesn't throw dice, but so you have to have faith, and then you have to accept that. And let me tell you something, man. It sounds easy, right? Oh, yeah, there's a loving God, and I just have to accept. Hey, man, God doesn't always want for you what you want for you, right? That's when it becomes hard, because God says, Gary, knock that off, cut it out already, get over here. And then I go, oh, yeah, God, okay. And then, yeah, there I go again. No, over here, right? It's like dealing with a child. Constantly, no, over here. And then, you know, what happens? Oh, okay, you want to keep going back to that thing I told you not to mess with? Oh, go ahead. And then you fall down, go boom, and you cry. And then they say, oh, it's okay. You know, maybe now you know why I was telling you not to mess with that thing. You know what I'm saying? We still do this as full-blown adults. That's who we are. We are children compared to God. All of us, even after many lifetimes, if you accept the 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 doctrine of reincarnation. We're still children. And so accepting this authority and accepting the guidance of that authority, and really just, not messing ourselves up, not getting in our own stinking way. That's really the message of this card. And I got to tell you, as a person with this middle decan of Aquarius rising, man, I don't know why, but there's some, like, on the one hand, going against the wind. It's like that Bob Seger song, right? Against the wind, man. I'm sticking it to the man. Well, if the man is God, you better be careful about that, right? And again, it sounds funny, but I was just watching a movie that I love, for the umpteenth time, and the other night, Cool Hand Luke, right? I love that movie. I just love that movie. So, and every time, I just realized, like, that his number on his convict clothes is 37. And so now I'm looking into the numerology of that number and whatnot. So it's like, I don't care, right? When you've got these certain movies, you can watch them time and time and time again, and they're always new. But one thing about his relationship with God was kind of messed up, and it got him killed. It was really cool to be, nothing is a pretty cool hand, right? And it'd be like this hard-headed dude, got the respect of every man in that camp, because he's like, you're gonna have to kill me, yo. You think I'm gonna lay down for you? You're dreaming, man. No, not on your life. That's a wonderful thing, in as much as that kind of grit and determination will get you places in life, but it'll also wear you the heck out. I can tell you for sure. And when taken to, it's a decent relationship with an authority that is questionable at best, i.e. the man, in this case the law. Even for white men, at times that is a dicey idea. Human institutions are imperfect, period. But when you extend that to a divine institution, like, man, what are you talking about? He literally stood there in this middle of the road, daring God to strike him down. That's blasphemy. But it's not just blasphemy, it's just stupid. Don't tempt that kind of power, man. Because you could have just as easily said, love me, God. I need you. You see what I'm saying? And that is something that I can tell this is going to be a long one, because I'm already, like, we're only a couple slides in. I don't even know how much time has gone by here. I'm channeling something here, I guess. But that cry out to something higher or deeper, that's really what the nocturnal aspect of Mercury is about. I posted a video about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, moving from Earth to air, that I did with Gemini Brett way back. I think, man, it was like maybe 2016, 2017. And in it, I was talking about this, the cosmology of Hermeticism involves this tract from the Hermetica that's called the Poemandries, or the Divine Pymander. And in it, the original, in the beginning, the world was light in this cosmology, and the darkness came out of the light, and the darkness cried out to the light, and the light answered and injected the logos of some of the light into the darkness. This was the first division, and then there was a division between the architect, or the what they call the demiurge, and then who made the world, and humans out of the 7 planets, and then there's humans making themselves in the image of this. So we're like made in the image of this creator, thing that was made in the image of God. But anyways, at each point, there's like this division, and then there's like this primal calling out of one part to the other of like, like the separation creates this primal yearning, and this crying out for the reunion of these things is what brings them out, is what creates the alchemy. A really good example, and again, this is hopelessly, like dating myself and like totally, white boy rock and roll from the 90s, but the classic album by Pearl Jam, their first album, 10, which a lot of people say is either their best or their only, which I think is ridiculous. You simply have not listened to the others if you say that. But be that as it may, there's one song on there that I was listening to, and I actually heard for the first time. And I mean, I can't tell you how many thousands of times I've listened to this, and I felt it, but I got it for the first time, like, holy crap, he's singing himself into existence. It's called Release. And he's singing to his father, which of course, singing to father, I mean, from a Judeo-Christian point of view, that's singing to God, but there's this toning that begins the song with, and that tone is what created the world. The world was created from sound. The world is created from sound. And so that toning, that singing, that crying out, that is also the nocturnal aspect of Aquarius, of communication. That crying out to something that's missing, that yearning, and that giving voice to that yearning. I think about, man, I was in I guess you would call it meditation. I don't even know. My sister told me, I was having some back pain, and she was like, yeah, do this yoga pose. And I was like, what's that? She said child's pose. And I was like, what's that? And she showed me a diagram. I was like, oh my God, I've been doing that for like a year. I didn't even know what it was. It just felt good on my back, right? And so I'm sitting there in child pose, and I don't know why, but I started having this image of like whales. It's almost like a meditation. And I started to imagine, whales calling out to one another across the ocean, right? This primal call of, and that's what they do every day, man. They call out across these vast distances to one another. And it just struck me as so profoundly cosmic. It just, I mean, I broke down crying. It was so beautiful. This vision of the way that they communicate. And so I think that that's a big part of, like, rather than just like bottling it up and keeping it like whatever emotion you're having, there's no bad emotions. It needs to be expressed. It's the unexpressed emotions are the ones that are killing us. Obviously, if it's something that's potentially destructive, like anger or whatever, you have to find a way to do it that's not dangerous to you or others, and so on. And if it's, and if it's dark depression and stuff, you want to have a safety system where somebody knows what's going on with you and can check in with you and all that stuff, right? Same thing's true after you do some of these shamanic things and whatever, like if it's done right, when you do a vision quest, you should have somebody checking in on you, right? So certainly keep that in mind. But when you're expressing some of these more difficult emotions, but the expression of the emotion is the way out is through. Yeah. And so expressing these deeper, more hidden feelings through sound and figuring out what the sound is of whatever emotion we're having, that has an enormous power with Mercury being retrograde in Aquarius. All right, I'm going to pause just 1 second here and get my bearings. Okay, this is going to be a long one, y'all, because this stuff is just pouring out of me. All right. I'm going to focus and get moving along here. Now, transformation. So how do we transform? Trans, by the way, means across, beyond, or on the other side of. If we take form to mean organizing principles, then transformation means going beyond the current organizing principles. That's what Aquarius is actually about, Capricorn is like the nocturnal domicile of Saturn. Capricorn says, hey, there's this walled city, there's only one way in and one way out. You got to be, you got to be in accordance with the system, or you don't get in, right? It's a closed system. Aquarius is an open system, and so it's literally and so literally Aquarius is the exile. When I was talking about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius for Astrology Hub, and one of the themes that I told them is the rise of the exile. Because, and that's why, the people who are preaching the age of Aquarius, I feel like saying to them, hey, man, before you go preaching Aquarius, love and light and brotherhood and sisterhood, like, understand you'd be better off like either living as or talking to homeless people to understand the real nature of Aquarius, because it's only when you're outside of the system, when you're either cast out of the city or wander out, and that's why this crying out, it's like I said, there's this separation and then there's this crying out. But are you crying out to get back into the system that either didn't want you or you didn't want it? Or are you crying out for the next thing? You're crying out for the future, right? So Mercury is the perfect planet of transformation, because Mercury transforms all the time. Mercury goes from being evening star to invisible to morning star. Every month it's a new deal for Mercury, right? So Mercury really is the planet of transformation. A lot of people say, oh, Pluto this. Okay, fine, Pluto is what it is, but really on a more intimate level, I think, or on a more immediate level, the planet of transformation is Mercury. Now, as we said, and this transformation is not just happening on this back and forth. It's not just going, through Aquarius back and forth again, right? We talked about that last time. Like, that's a very limited and actually, from only one point of view, like a top down from the ecliptic North Pole. Yeah, it looks like this, right? But then there's this other view, which some more advanced astrologers like Erin Sullivan definitely goes into this view in her book about retrograde planets, where if you understand the superior part of Mercury's orbit and the inferior part, then you understand that Mercury is penetrating the Earth, the Sun-Earth enclave, right? Mercury is penetrating the heart space of the system. So that's another kind of mixing. But there's two more kinds of mixing that hardly anybody ever talks about. And one is this mixing between the above and the below, visible, invisible. We're going to talk some more about that. And the final part is this mixing between north and south on the ecliptic, these loops that Mercury makes. So there's this profound transformation that's actually happening on at least 4 dimensions. And again, I outlined those a lot more in depth last week. So if you want to check that out. But what's really interesting is that, first of all, there's a correlation between 3 of these dimensions every single time that I discovered. And then this time around, there's actually a correlation between all 4. It's amazing. So to understand this, we have to go back to the Emerald Tablet, which is part of the Hermetica. It's an ancient mystical document that basically contains the entire formula for the formation of the world, and or to alchemically change, anything, to transform anything. And the way it starts off, it doesn't say as above, so below. It sort of does, but not exactly. What it says is this: that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, in order to accomplish the miracles of the one. Okay, so there's a correspondence, there's a two-way flow of above below happening here. You see, it's not just simply, you know, all the stars are causing you to do something. It ain't like that, man. It's right there in black and white. It's not like that. And so anybody who wants to jump on that bandwagon, you know, skeptics or whatever, read the thing. It doesn't say as above below. Now, what's really fascinating about this that I discovered as one day I was coming back from observing Mercury in the sky, and I'm looking at this emerald tablet on my desk, and I'm going above, below, above, below. I'm like, wow, that, Mercury's above and then it's below, and there's certain months I can see it in the sky and certain months I can't. I'm like, is it possible that this thing is speaking to, right? Like, I was thinking, oh, it's just mystical, it's just consciousness, it's just spirit. Like, that's a spiritual document. It's talking about spiritual reality. It ain't talking about material reality. No, man, that can't be. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. It actually is talking about material reality. Because in fact, the three turning points of Mercury's journey, maximum elongation as evening star, which we're coming up on January 24th, the conjunction with the sun, and then maximum elongation in the morning sky. Those three events, very different in terms of above in the west, not visible, below visibility, and then above in the east. Those three things are the same in terms of this back and forth of the longitude. So this back and forth of the longitude and this back and forth of the horizon, actually, there's a connection. And not just that, this superior, inferior, guess what? The maximum elongations are such because what's happening is Mercury is matching the speed of the sun. And as it matches the speed of the sun, it becomes still. It's stretching out from the sun. It's going further. It's faster than the sun. And it stops. It matches the speed of the sun. Then it's slower and it begins to shrink, right? So this time when it's matching the speed of the sun is the exact time when it's penetrating the sun-earth sanctum. So all three of these are connected, you see? So the inferior conjunction corresponds to the elongations, and these elongations correspond to entering and exiting the inferior part of the inner sanctum. So these three things are all connected, you see? And so talking about just one of them is like scientists saying everything's material. You're disowning the soul and the spirit. There's no God. Everything's just random electrons. Man, what you talking about? I just can't even get along with that for even 5 seconds because it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And so what we have is that the maximum elongation on January 23rd, 24th happens at Aquarius around 23 degrees. The conjunction on February 8th happens at around Aquarius 21 degrees, and the elongation on March 6th happens at about Aquarius 20 degrees, all in the same degrees, despite being very different, despite entering the inner sanctum, being at a deepest penetration of the inner sanctum, leaving the inner sanctum, despite being above in the west, below, and then above in the east. They're all three connected. And this happens every single time, man. I mean, I can't tell you how wide open my mind was blown when I realized that. And that's how I get, that's why I made this book, because I was just like, oh my God, I got to tell people about this, So that's Hermetica Triptica Volume 1. That's the primary insight that brought that into being. And what's crazy about this time is that there's even a cherry on top of the fact that not just these three dimensions, one of which most people know about, the second of which some people, the third of which relatively few, the fourth of which almost nobody is connected to. The fourth one is Mercury crossing the ecliptic, this Guzahar or Jauzahir that we talked about a while ago with Mars. That's happening on the same day of Mercury's elongation. So this, and it's happening right here in the tail of the goatfish, along with Sad al-Sud and Deneb al-Gedi. These two really benefic stars, the luckiest of the lucky, and the great civilizing influence of Deneb al-Gedi. I mean, that's one heck of a cherry on top to have a magical star aligned with all this. Mercury's crossing the ecliptic, so Mercury's injecting its energy directly into the Earth plane. I mean, so normally you've got three of these dimensions all related, which is pretty profound. Now you've got this fourth dimension, and you've got a magical star for the cherry, couple cherries, Sad al-Sud and Deneb al-Gedi. It's amazing. The only really thing that keeps me from saying, like, you know, engrave a permanent talisman at this time is that the Sun and Saturn are still applying to Uranus, to a square with Uranus, and that's not something I would want on a permanent basis. So prayers, petitions, maybe even paper talismans are in order, but certainly prayers and petitions. And I think I read to you the passage the last time in Pictrix. They would burn incense and say prayers to the planet for sure on these days. But yeah, that Saturn Uranus thing, I mean, that's a pretty bloody myth, right? It's a bloody transfer of power. And so I definitely would not want to be permanently invoking that, although it has its place, if there's a repressive regime in place and you try to talk to them and they won't listen, or they won't work with you. Now, that's a big if, right? A lot of people these days, seems to me, say, oh, so-and-so is repressive because I say so, down with them, destroy them. Like, wait a second, did you even talk to them? But, that's just me. Hey, I'm not down with vigilantism myself. But, that whole Saturn Uranus thing, whichever way it's handled, it's not something that you want to be perpetually bound up in, because it's a long-term cycle for a reason, right? So now let's go further on. So what the heck, Gary, man, this stuff, all these four dimensions coming together, what in the world is this about? So if we look further along in what the Emerald Tablet tells us what it's about, it says it rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, right? That's that map we just saw about Mercury. It rises, it becomes visible, it becomes invisible, thereby combining within itself the powers of above and below. Now, the powers of above and below, as we talked about last time, is the conscious and the unconscious, right? So in other words, the purpose of Mercury retrograde is to combine the powers of the above with those of the below, the fixed and the volatile, to make the unconscious conscious, right? Because Carl Jung famously said, until you make the unconscious become conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, it's only because we weren't listening that these things, these unavoidable things, happen to us. Another way to think about it is, it begins with a whisper. You know how they say a word to the wise is sufficient? A whisper to the wise is sufficient. It only becomes a shout if you ain't listening, right? So, two lessons there. Probably not wise to start with shouting, and it's probably not wise to make someone shout before you hear them. All right, so making the unconscious conscious, and there's a specific sign, element, and house where that's going to be happening. And there are 3 stages to this process. So we have this wonderful map: evening star, invisible, and morning star. And this three-step process of transformation is a map that is absolutely throughout Christian mysticism. They talk about purgation, illumination, union. They're talking about a relationship with God. The first thing you got to do to get right with God is to stop it with all the stuff that's getting in the way of your relationship with God. And so that's why you go away to, you know, to a ashram or one of these monastery or someplace, right? To get all that crap out of the way. Purgation. Then you, once you're purified, that's also why they do the incense, you know, because, you know, cleansing is the first part of any ritual in any culture. And then you can receive the new illumination of spirit. And once you've received the illumination, then you can learn how to walk that talk, to walk that, to become one with it, to make it real in your life. So purgation, illumination, union, right? In alchemy, we call these negredo, albedo, rubedo, you know, blackening, whitening, reddening. Joseph Campbell talks about the three stages of the heroine's journey: separation, leaving the normal world, initiation into the special world, and then return to the normal world. Especially the one that I've been working with the most is this Kazemi, when Mercury's in the heart of the sun. Way before I got the insight for this book, I was telling people, look, there's this moment in the middle of the retrograde that's really powerful, and if you tune into it, you can really receive, you know, that how I said, you know, there's this calling out and there's this answer. You can receive, you can become open to mess. So it's a good day for divination. It's also a good day to initiate that calling out of like, hey, something's missing, and I'm in, you know, I need this or I need that, or I'm in pain, or I'm confused, or whatever it is, you know, to trust that there's something, someone, whatever you want to call it, listening. Okay, so now the particular house that Aquarius occupies in your chart will have a lot to say about how this shows up in your life. More getting back to the salt of like, okay, where do I have to address potential problems or kerfuffles or communication delays or blah, blah, blah. And because all three of the retrogrades are happening in the air signs this year, it's actually three houses that it can show up in, because these operate as a system, right? There's nothing, everything is one. There's no separation. Separation is an illusion. And particularly when we're talking about the elements are one of the fundamental basis of astrology. And so you might find that, you know, I remember when I was having them in the 4-8-12, I mean, literally, I was trying to sell my house, fourth house, eighth house, you know, I was going through, you know, financial stuff because, and 12th house, I was like, you know, I was like all alone in this house that was bare of possessions, because I was like staying behind and trying to get it, you know, ready for market. So I could definitely see that theme that year. So houses 1, 5, and 9, if you're an air sign rising, then this is the identity trigon. House 1 is literally like one way to think about it in Jungian terms, they call it the persona. I like to say it's like, rather than a mask, it's like the hats you wear, right? So you hear people say, oh, I had to wear a lot of hats today, right? Well, these hats that you wear, like you might have a whole rack full of hats and you might not even wear one of them anymore. In fact, you know, it goes with a costume and all the costume's gone and all you got is the hat. It's time to get rid of that hat, you know what I'm saying? And you might have these other hats that you know, I gotta wear that hat a lot and I'm kind of tired of wearing it, you know? you have these relationship with these different identities that you have to put on and take off in the course of your day. Um, and they provide you with certain creative opportunities, a palette within which you can create. Fifth house, right? And by creating, it takes you places, it expands your reality. Ninth house, you see, so 1, 5, and 9 are all related. 2, 6, and 10. So let's see, the second house from Aquarius is what? Pisces, right? Oh, sorry, no. Aquarius is the second house of Capricorn. So earth signs. For earth signs, the retrogrades are going to be happening in houses 2, 6, and 10. These are the trigon, I call the trigon of mastery. The second house is about your resources, both tangible and intangible, right? And so how we employ those resources, right? And the skills that we develop through working with those resources, sixth house, how we employ those resources on a day-to-day basis. And the skills we develop in deploying those resources lead to a certain amount of skill and functionality in the world that then leads to 10th house career, public. That's how we deal with the public. So 2, 6, and 10 are the trigon of mastery. So you might find, even though the retrograde's happening in your second house, 10th house themes are coming up, you see, because they're all related. Now, let's see, so Sagittarius. So for fire signs, the air signs are the 3, 7, 11. So for fire signs, so Sagittarius, right, 1, Capricorn 2, Aquarius is 3. So for fire signs, houses 3, 7, and 11. Now this is interesting because this is definitely something fairly unique, I think, to the way that, but what I came up with is I said, okay, the 7th house is about one-on-one relationships. The 11th house is about one-on-one relationships within a group setting. So we might call that intra-group relationships. And then the 3rd house is about relationships between groups. So inter-group relationships, right? Because the 3rd house is about your local neighborhood. Well, your local neighborhood is made up of a bunch of different groups, whether that be family units or ethnic cultures or what have you, right? So all of these are related. And so you may have something that seems like a local community issue, but next thing you know, it becomes an issue between you and your partner, whether that be business or intimate partner or whatever, right? Or, you know, it could be positive or negative. You know, you might say, oh, there's this thing going on in the community, and your partner goes, oh my God, that's really, and the next thing you know, you two become closer because you share an interest, right? Remember what I said about origin stories, getting back to the beginning. That's how people got together in the first place. If you want to get back together, then you start at the beginning and you share a common interest and so forth, right? 4, 8, 12. So if we go back one more from Sagittarius, you got Scorpio, right? Scorpio is 1, Sagittarius is 2, Capricorn is 3, Aquarius is 4. So 4, 8, 12, for the water signs, you have the trigon of dynasty. And this is, so the 4th house is both the home and the family, but it's also known as the end of the matter. It's like where you come from and where you end up, what you leave behind. So it's what you inherit from your parents, both biologically and materially, right? Because it's property, 4th house. But it's also what you leave behind, right? So you have the 4th house, like your family of origin. And then when you marry, you have a new family that you're part of. So you join with a whole nother. So you have And that, whether that be business or friendship, you know, if somebody has a really, really close friendship, that's like extended family. Same difference. It doesn't matter if they're married or not. It's extended family, eighth house. Like you merge at this bigger unit, and all the stuff that comes along with that. And then the 12th house is like your spiritual family. So you have like 3 different kinds of family that you're dealing with here, whether it be birth family, um, extended family, and then spiritual family, you see. So 4, 8, 12, all those different kinds of things could be coming up for water signs. Okay, so I had a few other slides to cover with y'all, but I think I'm gonna stop there before I get too far gone. But this period that's coming up, I think, is very transformational for a few reasons. In addition to the Mercury, I'm not sure what just happened with the recording there, so I might repeat myself here, so forgive me if I do, but in addition to the Mercury, you know, lining up on 3 dimensions like it usually does, and then this time a 4th and even a cherry 5th, if that wasn't enough for you, there's also, you know, the fact that Jupiter and Saturn, after their recent great conjunction, are being subsumed into the furnace, the crucible of the sun, right? And so there's a cazimi between the sun and Saturn on Saturday. Then the next day, there's Mercury's Guzahar, Jalzahir crossing the ecliptic. And then on Thursday, there's a Sun Jupiter cazimi. So the sun is joining with these 2 gas giants on their days, which is some pretty powerful juju, I think. And that represents to me like maybe a chance to really like take all of this stuff about the great conjunction that we were hearing and like really like go within and see like, where am I with all that, and like, what does this whole air thing mean on a more personal level, right? Because pretty soon Jupiter and Saturn are then going to come out of the beams of the sun into the morning sky, and that's like a new beginning, that's like a new birth. And so there's this rebirthing of the whole Jupiter Saturn thing that's happening at this time. And boy, do I have a whole lot of stuff to share with you about that. Oh my God. I mean, wait until you see. That's the next podcast. And I mean, it's just, I'm gonna have to write like a really long essay. I'm not even sure how, but there's a big podcast coming on that. And then there's a whole bunch of writing that I'm gonna do on that too. But if you want to just tune in or to make that cry out to Saturn or Jupiter, I mean, that's a really big opportunity too. So I definitely wanted to give you a heads up about that before I'm done here. And also, before I leave, just want to remind you to you know, check me out at dreamastrologer.com. Consider joining with the 3 levels of membership that I have. That's on the special offers page. Check us out like on iTunes or any of these other places and like give a review or like give a, you know, a star rating or something. If you've read the book and you've gotten something out of it, I would love to see people just say a few words on Amazon or one of these other places about their experience. I always love to see that. And then of course on Facebook, you can like, post and share posts there and stuff. So Just want to remind people to keep the sacred hoop flowing. Um, and, until, let's see, before I sign off, remember to listen, really listen, and not watch for, not just be tapping your foot waiting for the spaces in the conversation, but and um not like doing this thing that we do with these diurnal filters that we only see what we are used to seeing or programmed to see or whatever, but really listen to, especially stuff that either doesn't make sense, but well, you said that doesn't compute to me because the way I think about it, oh my God, that's wonderful. Like, yeah, like, whoa, I actually don't get it. What a wonderful opportunity that is. Um, when you say, I don't know, or I don't understand, I mean, that shows you're listening, right? Um, and really listen to whatever higher sources of inspiration or deeper sources of inspiration, like I said, like whether it be yoga. And that was really a trip for me where I was really just listening to, like, I don't know what you might call the animal soul or something. Um, and listening to the higher, whether what people call downloady type stuff. Um, and also remember to make those things that need to be expressed heard, to find a sound that corresponds with that and do that. And I think that ultimately this is a big deal. I mean, the great conjunction, Mercury's retrograding, in the sign of the great conjunction. I mean, this is like great conjunction 2.0, right? So we have another chance to really personalize what is this great conjunction and what does it actually mean for me in my life and my world? And like, hey, check this out. I don't know. I mean, it's like I was telling Amanda Walsh of the Astrology Hub, we were talking about, whether or not this is the Aquarius age. I said, I don't know about all that, but it's the right direction. And so I don't know if it's the age of Aquarius, man, but if you want it to be, check it out. Like figure out what that looks like. Like, how do you sing that into existence? What is the origin story of that? Like, what's the myth? Like, right? Because in the Egyptian myth, the sun god Atum was born out of this primal mound in the Nile River. So sunrise is a time of like recreate. So the image of sunrise itself has a primordial creative nature to it. It's like the world beginning again each day at sunrise. Simply witnessing a sunrise could be enough to trigger that primordial origin story. So figure out what origin story you vibe with and like get back in touch with that and figure out like what's the essential tone. Bring it down to its essence, its soul. One word, if I could encapsulate it in one word, what is it, right? Like I said, for Christ, it was love one another. That's the tone of the Piscean age. We're still figuring it out, obviously. What is the tone of the Aquarian age, for you? Because if you want it to be the age of Aquarius, though, the best way to make that happen is to tone it in, to figure out that cry of and to make it heard, you see? All right. Bright blessings of Mercury and Aquarius, its nocturnal triplicity domain, and also of the great conjunction Jupiter and Saturn. Until next time.